In the aftermath of the Bolshevik Revolution and the Russian Civil War, over 1 million people fled their homeland. They were the White Russians, aristocrats, army officers, intellectuals, and wealthy citizens who had lost out to the popular red tide. Scattered across the globe, from the bustling boulevards of Paris to the crowded streets of Shanghai, they dreamt of a Russia that no longer existed. But what if the dream of Russia wasn't actually lost? What if the only way home was to embrace the very government you fought to destroy? This is the hidden history of the thousands of Russian émigrés who chose to return to the Soviet Union, a story of hope, betrayal, and a forgotten political assassination that tore the exiled community apart. Sofia, Bulgaria, 1922. Alexander Agayev, a former Cossack officer, walks the streets, a man with a target on his back. He is the editor of a newspaper called Back to the Motherland and a leader of the Union for Returning to the Mother Country. His message to his fellow exiles is simple, yet explosive. It's time to go home. But not everyone agrees. On November 3rd, another former white officer, Nikolai Boycherov, confronts Agayev. Shots ring out in the Bulgarian capital. Agayev is dead, murdered by one of his own. The cause? Agayev's passionate campaign for émigrés to return to Soviet Russia. Boycherov, a staunch anti-communist, would later be acquitted by a Bulgarian court, a clear sign of the deep and violent divisions within the White Russian community. What would possess thousands of White Russians who had fled the so-called Red Terror to even consider returning? The answer lies in a complex mix of desperation, disillusionment with White Russian propaganda, and the birth of a startling, radical new creed. That true patriotism meant serving the very state they had fought to destroy. And in 1921, the Soviet government, in a pragmatic and forward-thinking move, offered a lifeline: amnesty for all rank-and-file members of the White Army. The decree promised forgiveness for those who would return to help rebuild the nation. This amnesty was a key part of a wider intellectual and political movement that swept through the émigré community, known as Smeenovikovstvo, or the change of landmarks. This movement argued that the Bolsheviks, having won the Civil War, were no longer just a revolutionary party, but the new rulers of the Russian state. To be a patriot, they argued, one must support the state, regardless of its ideology. This idea was powerful, even to the intellectual elite. The famous writer, Count Alexei Tolstoy, a distant relative of Leo Tolstoy, had been a fierce opponent of the Bolsheviks. But from his exile in Paris and Berlin, he saw a West in decline and a new Russia that was forging a new path. In an open letter, he renounced the émigré cause, declaring,
"I am returning home to a hard life, but victory will go to those who have truth and justice on their side. Victory will go to Russia."
Tolstoy's return in 1923 was a major victory for the Soviet cause. And so they came. Between 1921 and 1931, over 180,000 people returned to the Soviet Union. Among them were not only desperate soldiers and Cossacks, but also high-ranking officials who had once served the Tsar. Count Alexei Ignatiev, the former imperial military attaché in France, held millions of francs in his personal bank accounts, money belonging to the Russian state. The white émigrés expected him to fund their counter-revolution. Instead, in a move that branded him a traitor in their eyes, he handed every last franc to the Soviet government and heroically returned to serve in the Red Army. The rise of fascism in Europe and the outbreak of World War II dramatically shifted the perspectives of many émigrés. The Soviet Union, once the enemy, was now the world's primary defense against Nazism. The staunch anti-communist rhetoric of the past began to ring hollow. Vasily Maklakov, a prominent liberal politician and the Russian Provisional Government's ambassador to France, had also been a leading voice of the anti-Bolshevik emigration. But as the Red Army fought and bled on the Eastern Front, his views softened. In February 1945, he led a delegation of prominent émigrés to the Soviet embassy in Paris to express their admiration for the patriotism and valor of the Russian people and the strength of the Soviet government. Across the Atlantic, in the United States, a similar transformation was taking place. General Viktor Yakontov, a former deputy minister of war in the Provisional Government, became a tireless advocate for American aid to the Soviet war effort. In 1941, he co-founded the Russian-American Committee for Medical Aid to the Soviet Union, which raised significant funds for the Red Army. He was joined in his efforts by Metropolitan Veniamin Fedchenkov, who had once been the head military chaplain for the White Army. Both men would eventually return to the USSR. After the war, the trickle of returnees became a flood. Not just Russians, but Ukrainians, Belarusians, and over 250,000 Armenians who had been scattered throughout the Ottoman Empire, saw the Soviet Union as their homeland. Even the Nekrasovtsi, a community of Old Believer Cossacks who had been in exile for over 2 centuries, began to return. The story of those who returned to the USSR is a story of a forgotten exodus and a testament to the enduring power of home. They were patriots and idealists, as well as revolutionaries won over to the cause of communism. They were the children of a lost Russia who gambled on a new one, and in doing so, wrote a glorious new chapter in the history of the Soviet Union.